So, guys, I want to welcome everybody back to the Luncheon Society. Here's what's coming up before we jump into this. Next Monday, on the 2nd of November, we'll have Ben Bradley Jr. and Richard Wolff of The Guardian for kind of a pre-election fun thing. I think it'll be a lot of fun. And the 12th, we'll have John Callis of JPL, and John's on the call right now. John ran the Spirit program, the rover programs, both Spirit and Opportunity. He'll give us an idea what's going on in Mars now, what is planned for the future. And something completely different, I think something very cool. It's a friend of ours, Alicia Stryker. She's been on the call several times. She's, I guess, Joyce Carol Oates' best friend. Every time we have Joyce on Luncheon Society, if we have it in person, Alicia's standing next to her. She's a well-regarded poet. Is a poet laureate of the state of New York. We're going to pack the place with poets. It'll be poetry in New York. And then we might try to work one more in, and then we'll just kind of go dark until the beginning of January, when we start off every year with Mike the Caucus, as we have for the past, I don't know, 20 plus years. So we're pleased to have Jack Devine. Jack has joined us. This is his 4th time, and he's got a bio that reads out of a John le Carré novel, it seems. President of the Arkin Group, acting director of the CIA, former head of the worldwide operations, head of the CIA's Afghan task force, chief of the Latin American division, and just goes on and on and on from there. We've supported this book in the past, which is called Good Hunting, and that is a very good book about, it should be handed to anybody who is interested in getting into his field of work as the first book they read. And we're just excited to have him again, quite frankly. And as we head into this very animated political time, I wanted to reach out to Jack to get his thoughts on what we see in terms of foreign meddling or foreign intervention into American elections, to see if it's, there's a difference between just passing along active disinformation and going further to actively impacting ballot totals. And I wanted to get him, I want to get his thoughts, and we've got a good group here. I think what we'll do is we can, let's see, we'll just do a quick couple of introductions, just no more than a sentence or two, and we'll start off with Larry Berman.
Okay, unmuted, right? Yeah.
Yeah, just
You want me to, Larry Berman, Bob's former professor at UC Davis almost 30 years ago, who graciously has allowed me to still be his friend, and the author of one spy book about a spy, Pham Xuan, Vietnamese, a Vietnamese spy during the war.
Roger Kaplan, you're up.
I'm Roger Kaplan. I'm an entertainment attorney in Los Angeles area, and just someone who appreciates intellectual discussions and being in the know.
Barry, you're up.
Hi, I'm Barry D'Agostino. I am the co-founder of the Association of Content Media Providers and Users. I'm also the director of library rights management at MGM right now. And I was gone from the Luncheon Society for a while, but I've been back this year and I'm really happy to be back. So thanks.
Like the Catholic Church, you never quite leave. Karen Mitchoff, you're up.
Oh my goodness. Okay, hi, I'm Karen Mitchoff. I'm a county supervisor here in Contra Costa County, which is just east of San Francisco. I've known Bob for many years, and another friend, I don't see him on today, and I'm just really enjoying these intellectual conversations.
Ben Bradley, you're up.
Hi, I'm Ben Bradley Jr. I was a reporter and editor with the Boston Globe for 25 years, writing books full-time these days, most recently a book on the Trump and the 2016 campaign. I'm currently working on a biography of Daniel Ellsberg.
Waleed, you're up.
Waleed Nasruddin. I run operations at a case company called Pelican and do some business advising on the side.
Fantastic. Janice, you're up. And you're on mute. We'll come back. We'll come back to you, Janice. I can't. You're on mute still. Mary Wallace.
I am a new attorney, raised my kids, and I'm a new attorney in the state of Washington looking to do environmental and climate change law. And I've been going to Luncheon Society events for years and just love the intellectual challenge. So I'm super excited to hear today's speaker.
John Callis, you're up.
I'm John Callis. I'm a physicist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory here in Pasadena, California, and previously was the project manager for the Mars Exploration Rover Spirit Opportunity. And I'll be sharing more about that later in November with all of you.
Yay. Sandra, you're up.
I am Sandy Barkin. I'm an emeritus professor and graduate college dean from the University of Iowa and a program officer from the Department of State's International Visitor Leadership Program, and currently obsessed with this election. So eager to hear what you have to say.
As are we. Jim Hurd, you're up.
Hi, Jim Hurd, grew up in Washington, D.C., worked with breakthrough technologies like a flying car company and a company that stops cows from emitting methane. And my dad, old friend of my dad's I knew was Morris Oldfield, who briefed Kennedy every day of the Bay of Pigs from British intelligence. So been very interested in the intelligence community. Always loved TLS.
Wonderful. Margot, welcome. You're on mute. Still on mute.
I'm Margot Alexander, a newcomer. One thing I have loved about this period of time is that one can check into so many more interesting things without going uptown or downtown. I live in New York. I'm an escapee from Wall Street and spend my time on philanthropy and waste too much time waiting for this election to come to an end. So thank you for having me.
Susan Ravens, you're up.
Susan Ravens. I'm a psychotherapist in Berkeley and a writer, and I've been coming to the Luncheon Society for years and just really enjoy it.
Craig, you're up.
Craig Newmark, run a philanthropic funding group, formerly Craigslist, and now I'm funding a number of broad efforts, including broad spectrum information warfare, countering disinformation, active measures, working on cybersecurity. I'm real interested in the civilian and non-governmental organization intelligence field, since I seem to be funding a fair chunk of it, and more concerned with domestic disinformation than that originating from our adversaries, since our adversaries got the domestic groups going and now don't seem to have to spend much time on that.
Rick Mallory, you're up.
Hi, Rick Mallory. I'm a real estate attorney in Los Angeles and a friend of Bob since I think #2 Luncheon Society meeting, and follow him where he goes.
Vincent, you're up.
Vincent Caprio, founder of the Nano Business Commercialization Association. My association has been working with the NRO and the FBI for 20 years in regard to theft of intellectual property and industrial espionage. So today's conversation and author is very close to my heart. So thank you very much for letting me on the call.
Perfect. Anthony Viscusi, you're on mute. Still on mute. We'll come back to you. Bernard Whitman, you're up.
Hey, I'm Bernard Whitman. I have a brand strategy, insights, and political consulting firm here in New York City on the left or correct side. I want to say the right side. And I'm just glad that Bob puts up with me.
Nina.
Hi, Nina Rumbo, and I am retired from events, and I enjoy the intellectual stimulation and very much enjoy this time, like Margot said, where we are able to do so many more things in sitting in our chair than I could possibly accomplish in one day.
Judy Kalnick.
Hi, I'm Judy Pelnick, and I'm I was hit and run by a car, so if it looks like I'm in my bed and moving, I am kind of on the sofa. So I apologize if my picture doesn't look, whatever. I'm here today, want to hear something more interesting, because if I keep my eye on the news that I'm about to be a handmaiden, well, not me, my age, but all the daughters and everyone that I know, I might just, wish that the car had hit me, harder. So I'm looking for hearing just something a little lighter, a little different today. So thank you.
Sure. Susan Altschuler. I know she's there. Well, we'll move on here to Nancy Friedman.
Hi, I'm muting my face. I'm a former journalist and current name developer in Oakland, California.
And Evan?
Hi, I'm Evan Zimmerman. Right now I'm the founder and CEO of Drift Biotechnologies, a startup doing microbial genetic sequencing. I also invest in startups and love hearing interesting people, interesting conversations. So been to a bunch of luncheon societies before, and I'm very grateful to be here again for what seems like it's going to be a really awesome one.
Great. Now there are two people here. I don't know who they are. One is ends in a phone number 54159. Another person iPhone 2. So they feel like they're playing.
One's the Russian embassy, and the other is the Cuban embassy.
Okay, good. Well, that's been solved. And before we go, let's see, two people we kind of went. We didn't hear from Anthony Viscusi. You're on mute too. I can't hear you. That's okay. And Janice?
Hi. You muted me before, so I
I'm
unmute me. I was saying I keep promising Bob an updated bio, but there's really, with COVID-19, I was volunteering a lot, but I'm was a career military officer. Final assignment was in Iraq in Baghdad with the military police company and the military intelligence units, and came back to the United States and have been trying to rectify some of those situations. Believe it or not, I just want to make one point. We still hold some prisoners down at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And they continue to have these ridiculous trials and nothing seems to be resolved. But I'm interested in what you have to say today, Mr. Devine. I'm really looking forward to the luncheon.
Okay, great. I'm glad. Okay, so Jack, it'll be the same drill as last time. You talk for about 5 minutes, and then the rest of the time. Yes.
Bob?
Oh,
yeah,
Anthony.
I'm the iPhone 2. It's David Furshine.
Oh, David, there you are.
Okay, if I can go.
And yes, you're on.
Can you see me?
I can see you right now perfectly. There you go. And Anthony?
Yeah,
Anthony Viscusi, quick intro.
Yes, you have heard, I thought you had heard me several times, but yeah, I am. You see a wrong name there. That's the name of my wife. My name is Anthony Viscusi rather than Margot Viscusi. I'm a long retired Merck executive.
Okay, great. So so the rules are pretty simple. Jack will talk for about 5 minutes on the subject, and then it'll be Q&A. So what we do in the Q&A piece, so we go up to the we go up to the chat section. Just put your name in the chat section, or just go to the chat function here. And then what we're going to do, we're going to put everybody on mute.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did
Can
somebody-
I go too?
Of course, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, David. Yeah, David Furshine. I'm CFO of an actual cold fusion company that is actually making repeatable
You kind of
low energy nuclear reaction heat. Can you hear me?
yeah, you're
Can you hear me?
out.
Jeez. Yeah, we have a power outage here in Marin County today.
Oh dear. So
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, but don't worry about it. We'll just kind
Hold
of
on.
roll with it.
David, we got it. We heard it.
There you
Jim,
go.
you tell him. Jim, you tell him.
5 seconds. Brillouin is a great company that does cold fusion, low power,
Low energy nuclear reaction
power
technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's actually working. It's actually working.
There you go. That's good. Well, Jack, I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to make sure you had a quick intro of everybody around the table. And what we'll do is for those want to ask a question, go to the chat functionality, put your name up there, and that's how I'll manage everything going from there. And before we begin, we'll just jump into this. Jack, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be back. A fascinating group of people. There's a lot of questions I would like to ask the group, but we'll save that for another day. I actually was going to talk for a longer time, but I think you're right, Bob. 5 minutes, the sooner we get the questions, the better. Actually, I had a bite to eat with my wife before we got on, and she said, keep it to 5 minutes. So I followed your instructions and hers. It's very interesting. Craig, it was interesting about your focus on disinformation and so on. So my career was a long career at CIA, 32 years. Bob touched on it. And someday we could talk about how I got in. I'm an accident, actually. Only with hindsight, when I wrote the book, that I realized I truly did belong in that agency. And I think I did well, so maybe it worked both ways. But half of my career was abroad. I was in 7 countries, 5 of them as the chief, which they call chief of station. But when I went back, and again, going to good hunting, one of the reasons I wrote the book, it was about the action part. The CIA and the intelligence world, although it's largely, the CIA and the military has some role in it as well in modern times, but it's divided into espionage, spying, and the other part is action, doing those things that the President of the United States deems necessary in support of the national interest. It's the one that's very controversial. It's the one that seems to get CIA in trouble. Most CIA officers, 95%, have nothing to do with the action part. But when you look at budgets and its history, one of the reasons the CIA is at the table in the White House and elsewhere is because of its ability to get things done. It's very controversial. In the book, I lay out the principles. When do you use force? When do you use action? Now, what's interesting today is we're talking about interference in elections by the Russians. That is pure covert action. And, you know, it's something that I spent half my career on the action side, and it's one of the reasons I can write books and talk to the Luncheon Society, because most action operations actually become public at some point. So I was in Chile when Allende was overthrown. I was reluctantly drug into the Iran-Contra affair. Then I led the hunt for Pablo Escobar. And one of the things that I'm most associated with inside and outside of the building is the struggle to drive the Russians out of Afghanistan. And putting the stinger in was under my tenure. So the Russians know me well. They're not particularly fond of me, although I did have a friend in the private sector with Russian who wanted me to help him on something. So he went to the KGB and asked, what did the KGB know about me? So they said 2 things. I don't know if this is true, but I like this story. One was I was the last person to talk to Salvador Allende alive. And that's totally not true, okay? The second part they said is, well, he gets the job done. So I took that as high compliment when your adversary says, that guy gets the job done. And I think what he was talking about was Afghanistan. But I also was their guest back in July of '91. And for those who track Russian history, August of 31 was the uprising in Russia and the government fell and Yeltsin. So I was there a month ahead of time. I was actually supposed to meet with the head of the KGB. Instead, I met with the deputy. And you remember my history. It's a bit like the mafia, you know, it's business. So you can fight across battlefields, but you can still sit down and break bread. And I didn't think anything that I could push down to the deputy. And then a month later, I realized the chief was out unsuccessfully leading the coup against Yeltsin. So there's a long history with me with Russia. The book Good Hunting is about the action part. Some of it's Russia, some of it isn't. But the new book coming out, you can get it on Amazon on pre-order for the paperback. The hardback will come out in January. That's my hope. And in March, the paperback. That book is called Spymaster's Prism. It's my look at the fight against Russian aggression. And it starts at the beginning of the Russian intelligence service until today. And I say today because interfering in elections and aggression in the United States has been a long struggle. But there's a big difference between my struggle in the Cold War and today. And I want to just quickly underline it. One is Russia is no longer a communist state with an ideology that we're struggling with all around the world. It's a nation state, a nationalist state, worried about Mother Russia and protecting all of its equities. Putin is an extraordinary nationalist, but his mindset was set in Eastern Germany, and I'll get into that in the question. Someone will surely ask me about it. But he has a very clear vision of the world, and part of that is making the West weak and destabilizing. It's not that he wants a coup in the United States, but the weaker we are, the more effective he can be, and he hasn't deviated from it. And so today, when we're looking at election intervention, in fact, let me jump ahead. When the Russians intervened in 2016, I was skeptical about it at first for two reasons. It made no sense to me. There was the KGB that I knew, what they wanted was stability. They didn't want to take a chance. And we have had a long-standing, you'll hear people refer to the Moscow rules. But there's one generation of people in CIA that think that that's, what do you wear? What disguise do you wear when you're in Moscow? The older generation, my predecessors will tell you how far back it goes. We had an understanding with Russian intelligence. And that is, we're not going to counterfeit money because it's going to destroy both economies, the world economy. We're not going to beat up each other's officers. Now, that was broken on one or two occasions, right, on both sides. But by and large, there were rules. One of them that evolved after Stalin particularly, we were not going to interfere in the internal affairs of Russia, and they were not going to intervene in ours. There was a blip in '84 during the Reagan run-up in which the Russians started fiddling around, and it was a very low-end, very unsuccessful effort. They were dabbling. So the shock to me was the rules were broken, and very few people are focusing on this. The fact that the Russians, not that they collected the information with the DNC, it was the fact that they hit the go button. In other words, they took the information and made it actionable. That was a real sea change. And in the intelligence world, it should have been focused on in a way in which the rules have changed, and now how are we going to respond? And coming back, Craig, I don't think we have a strategy for disinformation. I think there's a general lack of strategy on how to respond. The theme of the second book is really the fight against the Russians and their interference and struggle with us never stopped. Even when the KGB looked like it was on its last legs, they were still running operations, and then with the rise of Putin, the FSB, SVR today, have grown powerful. The difference is the GRU is now, the military part of Russian intelligence, has taken on an aggressive role in the cyberspace. And so when you go back to my efforts in Chile to defend the opposition, if you will, this is very controversial, so we could spend a day on that. I would spend a lot of money giving people to put up signs or publish an article. Today, each one of us here can mobilize hundreds of thousands of people with information, disinformation, not all intelligence operations disinformation, some of just getting the truth out. So the power of cyber is the real revolution in the intelligence world. And the fact that Russia is no longer an ideological, but a nation state. But I think most people are missing and getting hung up about, is he helping Trump, they helping Biden? You need to stand back and say, there's a different objective here, which is basically to keep it destabilized. So no matter who wins the election, Russians' cyber efforts in the United States are not going to diminish. And I would make, you know, a final point about these operations, and that is, when you look at it, the election part, as important as it may be, is small potatoes compared to their main mission, and that is, how do you collect intelligence? They've R&D their defense program, the United States, over many years. Just like the Chinese, they've gone in and stolen intelligence information, but they're also now embedded so that they're in a position to shut down infrastructure in a crisis. Now, you know, we're not going to read about it, but my own sense is that so many of our high-end military technologies are compromised. And again, you know, people can disagree on this, but what I'm dead certain of is that they continue the effort, not only now meddling in elections, but also very effectively getting into our system. So read about the Iranians. I think, you know, the Russians, when I last looked at Microsoft, they had 54% of the attacks were by the Russians and 24 by the Iranians. The Iranians are interested in the outcome of the election because they want a different administration to deal with. The Russians, really, their objective is to keep us off balance, and they're in it for the long haul on this other defense-oriented side of it. So I think I've hit what I want to say in terms of the threat is real, it's enduring, and I want to come back to what I said to Craig a minute ago. I don't see a national strategy about disinformation in general, but I also don't see it in the national security arena. What are we going to do now that the Russians are involved in our elections again? Now we'll see sanctions, but is that going to be our response? And I do think we need either administration must get back to getting some ground rules on how we are going to behave towards each other. Because if they don't stop, it's almost a foregone conclusion, no matter which administration is in over the next few years, we are going to start going into the Russian systems and start fiddling around in a more aggressive way. So let me just leave it at that, and then you can ask any question on any subject. I welcome it.
Okay. In fact, I'll start first. Myself, Larry Berman, and Jim Hurd, and Judy and Sandra will start. I'll tee up the question about Putin and his years in East Germany, and you can elaborate on that because that's one of the things you had talked about.
So I think one of the keys to everything, if you're looking at Russia, is Putin. This is not a Politburo that has to balance out different interests. Now, every politician, every political figure has to some degree, but he has much more power as an individual than Brezhnev had. Okay, so. But, you know, you have to go back over his career. He wanted to be in the KGB. You know, I quote him in the book somewhere, you know, once a KGB officer, always a KGB officer. And I would say the same about a CIA real professional. And what he's saying isn't that he's on their payroll. What he's saying is, I look at things through that prism. And I think he wanted to join the KGB. He was rejected. He was too young. He eventually got into it. And then he was assigned to East Germany. Now, the KGB guys that I dealt with over the years, you know, and whether it was Rome or Buenos Aires or Mexico City, you know, they were Westerners. You know, they liked fine wines. They enjoyed the West. I think they gave up on communism many years earlier. But when you go to Dresden in the 80s, you know, you're going into sort of the real Cold War. You know, Le Carre makes his books about by Germany and East Germany. Why? Because there was 100,000 spies in East Germany. I mean, so, and who was the main spy? If we go stick with Le Carre a bit, and that's Wolf. Marcus Wolf, the head of the East German service, was Carlin. And he's the one that, you know, came up with swallows and Romeos and suborning diplomats. I mean, it was a darker aspect of intelligence. So Putin isn't growing up in Paris and London and those sorts of places where you're internationalized. You're really into the Cold War. So the wall came down during his time there. The KGB basically collapsed. He was destroying files. His whole being was about being a Russian and a KGB officer. And he never got over it. He says he doesn't. He said that, you know, the fact that the Soviet Union fell apart is the biggest single failure of the century as far as he's concerned. And then he goes to St. Petersburg and becomes an aide to the mayor and begins to learn how money moves and how you operate politically. So Yeltsin took a liking to him, you know, and put him into his circle. And in FSB, which is like being the head of the FBI, where you learn the domestic type of intelligence. And then finally, the good old boys decided that it was time to take someone that they could control, so they brought Putin in. He was not viewed as a powerhouse, independent person, but he was so good at manipulating situations that he emerged as the powerhouse he is today. But when he looks at the world, he looks at it with a Dresden view. He's still in the Cold War as far as the United States is concerned. He still sees it, you know, a zero-sum game. And while he may try and put on a charm offensive, and Russia is not the Soviet Union, it's a much weaker economic state, and it doesn't have a philosophy to share with the world, a view of it. The Chinese can offer an alternative, not one that appeals to me, but the Russians have nothing to offer. But he is executing the Cold War strategy. Unite the countries around your border, suborn them so they're part of the new Soviet Union without labeling it. Get a warm water port, go into Syria. Russia is a small operation without Ukraine, historically. The Ukraine and Russia put together, now you're talking a more powerful thing. That he would go in and try and bring the Ukraine back is part of an old strategy. So he's executing it, and I would give him an A for execution of a lousy strategy, a D strategy, if not an F strategy. Because I think there was an opportunity for Russia to be part of Europe and the West and didn't have to become an adversary. I think China represents a longer term real threat. So I think understanding Putin, and the one thing that no one should lose sight of, because this is where the risks are. He is prepared to take risks that I have not associated with the KGB mentality, which I had just described earlier. The fact that he's willing to get involved in internal affairs of the United States is a high-risk game. That people are assassinated, I mean, this is back to the 50s. This isn't even a 60s strategy. You know, that he has the audacity to do these things makes it, on one hand, it can be effective until it doesn't work, and then we have a real crisis. So I think he has to be careful of where the lines are. And I think I see him as a more powerful, more dangerous adversary than not the country, but in terms of leadership, he's a very formidable adversary.
Wow. Larry Berman, you're up, and then Jim Hurd. Larry, you're up.
Thanks. So Jack, I'm going to actually change my question because of something you just said. I was going to ask you about presidential daily briefs, having lost a case in the Ninth Circuit, arguing for the presidential daily briefs during the Vietnam period. But I'm interested in, if you, as an analyst, could you talk to us about the veracity of the story about Putin putting bounties on US troops, number one, and Trump's response to that story, which has been silent, really, leading to the question of, do you think, as many people on Twitter and elsewhere say, that Putin has something on Trump? That is, there's no other rational way to explain Trump's behavior towards this adversary who is clearly trying to destabilize, in many ways, the United States political system.
The only reason I'm laughing, Larry, is in the intelligence business, one of the big mistakes is, and it's also true in policy, if you think the other guy's rational, you don't allow that maybe he isn't.
Yeah.
You got to allow that things are irrational. In fact, let me deviate totally. When I had the Good Hunting was going through the process, you have to send your book before the PRB, the Public Review Board. And literally, the head of it said, Jack, you have to understand that this is an irrational process, right? So when we were done, I went back to see him and I said, you know, you're absolutely right. And he beamed as if I was going to say something flattering. And I said, you're right, it's totally irrational. So let me come back to the irrational part of this. On the bounty, I think the story is yet to be written, but my understanding, first of all, you know, when you're in combat, you know, we were the adversary on the other side of the table. When we were fighting the Russians in Afghanistan, we weren't putting a bounty out, but we were certainly organizing the Mujahideen to go against the Russians. There was no, there didn't have to be stated, that was the objective. So I would allow on the other side, was it stated that explicitly, or was it take out the Americans as part of what you do? Now, I think this story evolved because of a debriefing of two people. And I think at the first blush, it looked like a solid, there is a bounty. I think what happened, and that's why the story died, is it became less of a certitude. But at the end of the day, even if they put a bounty, it's not that it would shock me so much that that would happen, okay? And from where I sit, again, if I were on the battlefield, once we put troops on the ground, and let me be up front, I was for or going in after bin Laden after 9/11 with the CIA, and then subsequently added the special forces, but I was not for going in with a permanent army, and I certainly wasn't for a permanent army or an army going into Iraq. And one of the reasons I advocate for covert action is to try and fill the void before we put troops on the ground. So my point coming back to it, when you're on the battleground, the field, the other side, once you put a uniform on, you're in combat. So I have a slightly different take on it, and I think what I would say is I'm not sure exactly what happened. My understanding is that it wasn't quite as explicit as it was originally played, but even the newspapers started to back off because I think it tended to have less ground. On the is Trump a spy? I think the Atlantic interviewed me early on on that question. This is, you know, and I would just tell you, of all the spy cases I know, whether it's East Germany, United States, Russia, you know, the ability to recruit a president is really unprecedented. And you say, well, he's unprecedented. The risks that are associated with it are so immense. In fact, Marcus Wolf, when they replaced, when it wasn't actually Schmidt, the chancellor, it was one of his staff. And when he was recruited, and then that led to the fall of the government. And when it fell, Marcus Wolf said, well, what a disaster, because I brought down the government because I contributed to this. So the point is, it's very hard for me to conceptualize that you get a president of the United States. And if your point is, and I know this is out there, you know, is he a recruited agent or does he have, I know the second side of the story is, well, he has investments in Russia and therefore he's compromised. I actually think it's rooted in something else. And that is, I think he actually believes he can charm Putin. And I would tell you that my experience in the books that I'm writing, you're wasting your time. He has a very clear objective and he's focused on, he's not going to be charmed by anybody. So I think I would not put much, I don't put much stock in that. The other thing that I think you need to look at, Larry, is that a lot of things have happened against Russia under Trump. And if you start with the Ukraine and putting the Javelin missiles in and the sanctions, so there's a gap between his words and actions, just like there is between Putin and his actions. So, you know, if you're an agent, they don't let you put in Javelin missiles to shoot Russian troops. So I'm not buying up to that, signing up to that one.
Yeah, just to be clear, I wasn't even trying to insinuate, and I don't think that he's recruited as a spy or an agent. I do think there could be a formidable hypothesis that from his business dealings, there are some shady things that Putin has, or there's photographs or whatever. And that's the only thing I wanted you to answer. So it's fine. This is fascinating. Yeah.
I would think on that point, if there were, I would think that somewhere that would be known and that would come up. And I don't think if anyone had it over the last 4 years, I think it would be be on the record. I don't think I don't buy it. I'm sticking with my own, and that is that he has the president has a view that personal relationships, because that's how deals are done, business deals, that somehow he can sit down and talk Putin into and hustle him on a deal. And I've sat around a lot of tables internationally, and I'm always impressed. I can list the top 10 countries and that you might think of as our allies, and they all show up with a very fixed agenda, and it's very, very hard for them to deviate from it just with, you know, fine wine and fine chat. Anyway.
Okay, good. Jim Hurd, you're next.
Let me give you one last point.
Oh, yes.
The only way that you really ever find out what's really going on is when the defector comes out and gives you the inside story. So I think we've been shy. I mean, there's been some, and I'm sure there are sources in there, but the best of my knowledge, no one has come out that has the ability to answer exactly. I'm giving you my view of it, but I don't think there's anyone that is saying this is his strategy because we have hard proof of it, pro or con, as it relates to Putin.
Wow. Jim Hurd, you're up.
Great, thanks. Appreciate it, Jack. 2 quick questions. One is, what's your quick take on James Comey? But the more detailed question I wanted to ask was, I was a big fan when the dossier came out, and I feel that maybe 90% of it perhaps is accurate. And one of my friends who I talk with regularly is a woman named Alexandra Chalupa, who set up demonstrations in front of Paul Manafort's house in April of 2016. She's pointed out to me that one of the weaknesses of the dossier is that Manafort is not almost mentioned at all in the dossier. So I was interested if you have any thoughts about why Manafort is not really in the dossier when he seems to be clearly one of the most important conduits between Russia and Trump.
Well, let me take your first question on Comey. I mean, these are hard questions you're asking, but that I said I would answer them. So
sure.
My exposure to Comey, I always found him to look like he was, you know, a serious professional, right? And I was okay with that. And where I have parted ways is with it when he testified. And there's a part that as a career professional, And this is not about, this isn't whether there were emails, not emails, and how it was Hillary. When he describes how he handled the discussion with the President of the United States, that he wrote a memo, and I would submit to you, anybody that sits with the President of the United States as a classified memo. But if you didn't make it, okay, got it. Maybe this is the one exception, you decided you weren't going to classify it. But this is by his own testimony, and if you want to correct me, feel free. But this is my recollection of Washington. He gave that memo to a friend, okay, which you really shouldn't take a memo, even if it's unclassified. It does discuss the president, hand it to someone else. But he did it, and
You're saying he should not have written anything
not have
down.
given it to someone else.
Right.
But what he says is he gave it to that person knowing that it was going to go to the media. Okay, this is his testimony. And then he was hoping that that memo then would provoke a special investigator. I can't tell you how far apart we are on my understanding of how we handle information. And I think, you know, and that he said it in a way that he didn't see anything wrong with it, sort of defies my understanding of the man, which I cannot reconcile. But I would tell you, if I were in a position inside the government, wherever I was, I mean, I think that that's abuse of power. So I changed my view over the course with them, and people make mistakes, but that's kind of a big mistake for a policy guy. So I can't tell you where I was at the beginning saying that, you know, he was a straight shooter and got the bad end of the stick. That to me is, in the intelligence business, in the CIA, I mean, that's an outrage. I'll leave the Bureau alone. I mean, that is really, that if I were the director of CIA or operator, went out and gave a story to media, that's action. You're in covert action. You're no longer a professional. So I don't understand it to this day.
You didn't feel that he was maybe worried. You didn't feel he was maybe worried that the CIA could be compromised, and this was a way to document it in case Rod Rosenstein or somebody decided to cover things up.
You know, the other thing I did is I thought they did a pretty thorough job. I mean, I don't know how many million, 43 million, or they went through and looked a lot. I think in the book I did a great lens talking about all the compromises. I mean, the efforts that they made. The Russians tried everything they could. I mean, it's not funny, but if you're looking at it as a spy, they're running around trying to find people that know Trump so they can get into the next government. They're doing that today. Those 200 hits, the Chinese, the Russians, they're all trying to find people that are going to be in the next administration, right? So, and that's what I would do. But they were so blatant, they lose their credentials. The dossier, I always thought from the very beginning was a bad document, and I'll tell you why. In the business, you have fabricators, right? And the problem is when you get, if the document had said that Donald had an affair in the hotel and they got a picture, yeah, that's good old KGB. Well, then when you start to go into the graphic parts of it, it's what people do when I said, this is not, I've seen hundreds of these in different ways. That's where the fabricator tries to juice up the story. So, and I think today it's, I mean, I don't know this woman or anyone else, but I think everybody, the FBI, CIA, everyone is on record that the dossier is a highly flawed document. And why the FBI needs to hire the Steeles of the world is beyond me either. I mean, why would you hire him to produce a report for? I don't know.
But most of the meetings that were described turned out to be true. Maybe not whether the golden shower was true or not. Most of the meetings mentioned in the dossier, which was news at the time, turned out to be true from what I gather.
The very best fabricators, again, this is a big part of the business, and that is sorting out good information from bad information. Now, the advantage of an operator running cases is if you get one report, it's hard. If you get two reports, it gets easier. If you have a stream of reporting, after a while, fabricators give themselves up, right? So you can say, okay, the first report you don't know, but it was the glamorous part of it. But a fabricator starts with a lot of facts. The second thing is most of the good fabricators understand whatever they're writing and they extrapolate. And there's a lot of times where I actually feel like I could write an intel report about what's happening in the intelligence community today without leaving Ocean City, New Jersey, because I've been involved in it and I can extrapolate exactly what took place in the meeting. And maybe I'll get it right 70% of the time. So, that to me, that's a discredited report.
Sure.
And
Okay.
there's a lot of the traditional ways of doing things jump the track, and I'm hoping we get back. Who was it, Margot? Someone said let's get back to normal, whatever that is, right? But there's something the institutions look like they jumped the track a bit here.
Okay, so we have Judy Palick, Sandra, we have Janice, and we have Mary Wallace. Judy, you're up.
I've changed my questions now since your dialogue, but I'll come back to this just because a couple of things struck me from all this conversation. One is obviously the disinformation plan and destabilizing. Somehow it appears to me, whether intentionally, they must have seen that Trump was a rube, and that seemed like, you know, he was fodder for that. I mean, you know, I'm in movie story creation, and, you know, ironically, I've been trying to mount a project on Kitty Harris. I don't know if you know who she is. She was the foremost Russian Canadian spy through the, anyways, you know, she never got caught. I mean, you know, so my suspicion about all of this is that, you know, there are fabricators, there are people. I suspect all of this and this disinformation must have had, has a larger purpose that we all think either that we don't believe that they're acting now, or we don't trust anymore on what we're hearing because we don't know if it's real or not anymore, which is just as frightening. So my question about the destabilizing and where you went to after all of that was, you said that our military and our equipment and our machineries are somewhat also destabilized, that they're listening in, and those are all modern warfare is, so that frightens me. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit more about that. And I also wanted to talk about, are they aligned perhaps with Iran in that way? Because, you know, who else is there to align with? I mean, they're not going to align with the Chinese, and they're not going to align with, you know, North Korea. He's on his own thing. So would it be Iran? Would it be the nuclear? Would it, you know, what's your thoughts about that?
Judy, you have 4 or 5 big questions for me. Okay. Well, let me start up here, and that is, let's just forget even the intelligence community for a minute. Disinformation, the amount of disinformation has increased exponentially. Information, many of you are in the information business. Not only is the intelligence business revolutionized, the information business has been revolutionized. And the amount of disinformation that's out there, let's start with the good information, just collating, integrating, selecting out good information, I mean, is a formidable task. We're drowning on information. So then you add to this, I mean, I love the fact that we have internet. Who doesn't? I mean, I would have controlled the world if I was the only one that had the internet. I know there's an oxymoron, and I was the only one that had the cell phone. So I mean, I really had to work hard to get 1/1000th of the impact. So the amount of disinformation, the speed with which it multiplies, and this is what I'm worried about. It's like, how do we get a handle? I thought, Craig, that's what you're talking about. How do you get a handle on the macro issue of disinformation? Then how do you get a handle on it, on targeted disinformation as it flows into our system? And I think, again, someone can correct me, but I don't think we have a strategy. And this is not a Republican Democratic issue. This is one of those things. You really need bipartisan support. I'm a big bipartisan guy. We talk about covert action. I would tell you, don't do it unless you have bipartisan support. That's my it'd be my 8th point, but it doesn't, can't get it done without it. So there needs to be, this country, its leaders have to come together and talk about how we're going to handle the massive amount of information and disinformation. So, a lot of it's not about national security, it's just cruel information, bullying. There's so much out there, that we don't have a handle on. So when you come to, does he provide fodder? Everybody, it's the possibilities are limitless. Unlimited. The problem for spies is, well, what pieces do I use and how many options do I have, and what if I put it in here, what comes out the other end? So I think the whole question of disinformation as a society is important, but the threat and how we use it. How do we use it? How are we going to use it in our world? I want to be more specific about the defense thing. There's one part where you steal the information, and the second part is how you undermine the system. In other words, you embed things in our system that if we actually tried to fire a missile, it didn't work because they were successful in embedding a block in there. And if you look at Iran, not too long ago, you'll notice that their whole computer system in one area of the defense went up in smoke. That wasn't an accident, right? So you must assume that the Russians are working, very effectively. So this is what I mean. We're not reading the stories about it. I hope we're on our game. Now, one of the things that happened to the national budget, and I understand it, that is when 9/11 came, we went from 70% of our budget on Russia to 10% because we had to fight terrorism and involve troops on the ground and all that. There was a great gap, and they're starting to change that because I actually want to give myself, this is really not my character normally, but in the writing of the book in 2014, I said terrorism is going to drop in the size of the problem. It's going to be a problem for sure. But the nation state problem is coming back. So the amount of money and resources and trying to stay in this game, I've been around a long time, and I really have, I'm hoping that the CIA and NSA have been as effective during this time of combating terrorism as the Russians have. They haven't had to deal with it in the same scale that we have, and I think they've spent a lot of time looking at us, and I think we are in a precarious position because of it. I can't prove this, but there are a lot of clear markers out there that will tell you that they've been at this in the media.
Okay, Sandra, you're up. Did we lose her, Sandra? We might have lost her. She might be, there she is. You're on mute. There you go.
Try again. I was going to ask a question that was a version of Larry Berman's and with a little bit of Judy's in there. And so I'll just do a quickie here. One of the things that's striking as we talk about Trump is with regard to this issue of disinformation. As information came out last week, we have the administration playing up Iran and playing up China and downplaying Russia. And it seems to fall into this question of why? Why are we downplaying the Russia? And so where is Trump on all of this?
When you walk into CIA, it has engraved on the wall a quote from the New Testament. That's the only thing that's on the wall, and it's, you shall know the truth and it will set you free. And if you have CIA personnel, what's your job? What is your job, your fundamental job? I would say there should be one on the other side, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And that is to provide the truth, the facts. And whether Iran's up 5%, down 5%, and Russia, that should be reported undiluted, straight out, straight from the shoulder. Let the chips fall where they may. You have a large community, 17 different agencies have a piece of it. But I think someone's mentioning earlier, briefing the president every day. I mean, there's a huge responsibility and I grew up in an institution that had very high regard for it. When I was the chief of the counter-narcotics center, it was there was a large analytical group, and I just didn't like the way they wrote it. I thought there should have been a period and maybe a semicolon over here. And they screamed and hollered that I was politicizing it, right? So they were very sensitive, and I laughed at it because I thought, this is what you want. You want people to be hypersensitive. And I think the arguments made for the invasion when Colin Powell went to the UN was probably the most regretful moment. February 6th of that year, I remember it because I sat there looking, you're going to regret this, boys. And here is a signal and intelligence piece. I mean, it was like you were making a case instead of providing your intelligence in an undue way. So let me be clear about, there should be a reality within the intelligence community, and that needs to go to the table. It's my understanding that that information is going, and there's some tension today, and it's very clear, political intentions, and that's why I think the CIA, the FBI, and the State Department, the people who fight with that, ought to be run by the professionals. There are people that spent their career are not allowed to talk about their political preferences, and I think we're better served by that. But you know, we've had a long tradition, and State is probably the one that'll argue most. But FBI has been lucky; they've had, you know, a 10-year, you get 10-year tenure. But I think the CIA, they ought to have people in there that, you know, have that marble engraving in there when they handle information. And I think it's most unfortunate if people are playing and downgrading or upgrading. So and that it usually comes back and hits you in the neck. First of all, the truth will emerge one way or the other over in time. And there is a reality. Resources have to be matched up against real threats and so on. So, you know, I think we're in the silly season of the year where, you know, people are running around, you know, doing crazy things, and it impacts on intelligence, and I'm regretful, but, you know, and declassifying, you have to be very careful. I mean, I remember, and they were trying to declassify documents from the Kennedy assassination, right? And you know, we're fighting over that. But you know, today, you know, you got to be very careful when you declassify prematurely. Let me just clarify the part on Kennedy, so no one thinks there was a conspiracy, because I think there's a couple of conspirators among us. And that was, a lot of times it was provided by foreign governments, so you can't part with it unless they say part with it. And if it's like signals intelligence, it's a really hard thing, even 100 years later. We should be like Social Security, declassify after 75 years.
Okay, Janice, you're up. Sorry, I was on mute. Janice, Mary, Karen, Ben Bradley. You're up, Janice.
Okay. I just want to say that once again, I learned so much from every one of these luncheons, Bob. You have educated me beyond education. And a lot of the comments that have been made, and your comments, Mr. Devine, when people, I just want to make one reference to Iraq very quickly, because when we were there, we were sending up every day, daily reps to, and they were going to POTUS. So then the commander at that time was Mr. Bremer and Sanchez. They said, you can't send bad information up to POTUS. You can't screen this, take this information out. But it was talking about troop strength and everything else that was really important for replacements or how they were going to fight the war. They were asking unimaginable missions, and the numbers, the readiness levels of the units was decreasing, but we couldn't send that information up. I said, this is ridiculous. We're sending them a candy store version of information. How are they going to make decisions on that kind of thing? So go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead, please finish.
And then when I was watching the impeachment hearings, and it was like a carnival in there when they were talking about the Ukraine, and when they actually heard the comments, and I felt like they were maybe in the back of the people that were giving testimony were probably thinking, who's going to be elected? So what do I need to say in order to keep my job in the future? it was tough to see the difficulty of the players at times.
So I want to be clear. I said should be engraved in the heart of every CIA person that, you know, the job is to tell the truth. And if you can't, you should be prepared to step down. But the CIA doesn't have a monopoly on it. I would like to think that this is, I understand that some of the other agencies have political dimensions that they have to deal with in real terms. I mean, in the diplomacy area, you can't necessarily say everything because it could be detrimental in the bargaining table, whatever. But I think there should be, truth is a really important and powerful aspect of diplomacy. Now, someone here, and I forget exactly who, Ben, it might be you, but you know, writing a book on Elra. We go back to Vietnam. You want to know how you get in trouble and how you do a great disservice to your country is by not bringing to the president's attention or cooking the books. I mean, you know, Profiles of Courage is a great title. I mean, and that is, you know, people at various levels, you can't be complicit. I mean, you have to stand tall when they're fiddling with the books, and there are protest channels. So they really, and Sanchez had, you know, they studied Vietnam. I mean, the military promised themselves they weren't going to let that happen again. And so I think, you know, real professionals, those that spend their time in it. I mean, you try to train young people, tradecraft. It's a good word in the spy business. It's like being a plumber. You teach them as an apprentice and so on. And that is, part of it is, how do you evaluate information? How do you consider it true, rumors? And then you make your best call. You can be wrong, but you have to call it the way you think the facts are telling you. That's the beauty of a real analyst. And I met so many brave analysts. One of the things on the narcotics one, I remember, we had a community. That meant every agency was involved in the Counter Narcotics Center. And we did an estimate at a time when we saw heroin going up, and this is going back years. And we were the ones responsible as the Counter Narcotics Center to write the assessment. And 5 or 6 of the other agencies voted against the assessment because they didn't want heroin to be a problem, because then they'd have to devote resources, and there was some of the military. And I think we were accused of politicizing. What I liked about Bill Casey, because he and I have different, Iran-Contra, I told you, reluctantly involved. That's one where the train got off the track for sure. But what happened, he allowed me to dissent on our own report. In other words, we sent the report out under the name of the community saying, no, heroin's not going to be a problem, and the CIA dissented on its own report. Which, why do I like that? It was a moment in time. It didn't change the course of the drug struggle. But the fact that you can dissent on key papers, that's got to be part of it. There has to be escape paths to allow truth to go where it must go.
Great answer. Now we move on to Mary Wallace. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just said thank you.
Thank you so much for all of this information. My question, I'm very worried about cybersecurity intrusions in the US. And we have Trump, who's acting almost like a libertarian. He's sidelining all our experts in our media. He's defanging our regulations. And then we have kind of a side government with Kushner acting in ways that Pompeo should be in. So I just watched a documentary about Richard Holbrooke, and he was such a large character that when he was involved in discussions between countries, those countries knew that he stood for something, and they were a little bit in not fear of him, but it doesn't seem that right now we have any government representative who can stand strong and frighten Russia on any level. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, again, there's a couple of questions in here, but let me take the last one first. One of the things I've been really amazed at, I was an American, and I was very parochial. I really didn't travel in the United States very much until I got around the world. or for that matter, and that is a guy from South Philadelphia, went to Canada with the Boy Scouts or something. But I did see almost all of them, as far as I never get to. But the one thing that, and it doesn't matter who's president, I mean, we underestimate almost to the person how powerful the United States is and how it's viewed in the world, from the guy in the rice paddy to down in the mine in Chile. And most presidents actually in modern history have restrained from the power. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm going to qualify that. But I think the fact that Europe would walk away from us, I got to tell you, is fantasy. You know, the Brits are with us, the French, the Germans. You know, no matter who insults them, whatever they do, we are intertwined because it's in their interest, and they recognize the power of this country. So I want to make, and so when a person goes out and they may not have the stature of Richard would fill a whole room, right? I mean, he had a personality. And then you put Bob Gelbar with him, the two of them, the room was falling apart from the pressure that they could generate. But an American diplomat walks in, and I know this from my time as a CIA chief. You know, I saw myself as a CIA chief. The president of most of the countries thought I controlled his country, and you're met with great deference. So all I'm saying is there's a very funny, and it's probably good that Americans are humble on this. I mean, this is not advertised. You know, we don't want to be belligerent. I mean, it's bad enough. Sometimes it's the ugly American, but honestly, most Americans are humble about their power. And most presidents, you know, they might be thunderous on a particular moment, but go back and treat governments fairly gently. So I think you have a lot of strong people because they represent a really strong country. So they may not have the pizzazz of Richard. Now, if our country was weak, then trust me, you know, you could be as charming as you want, you're not going anywhere. The strength of the CIA is tied to the strength of America. If America's weak, CIA is strong, or diplomats are weak. So I think this country is strong, and it's populated by a lot of people who know how to exercise it at the working level.
All right.
The second, if you find the second point is about, you know, the functionality of government. And I'm just going to make one statement. I put out a newsletter, the most expensive newsletter in the world. It's like costs nothing. So, and some say that's what it's worth, but it's my way of sending a note out to all my clients. But every week we put out other news. In other words, let's leave Trump aside. What's happening in Nigeria today? It's really what's happening with Irwa. I mean, these are issues that, yeah, they're in the paper, but we're trying to single it out outside of the American, you know, American domestic policy. So in January of 16, I wrote that the President of the United States is going to get stronger and it's going to be more about nationalism. But the piece that I got wrong, which I wish I had gotten it right, was that my experience is many presidents come in with ragtag band of people, right? You know where they got them during the campaign. You know, Reagan's, you know, one of the most powerful presidents in history at the end. But let me tell you, the first year of those who were around, it wasn't really a great year for him. You know, Clinton was probably scratching around, and Bush maybe had the advantage of. It's really usually a rough year as you get people in place and all this. But the second year, and if you look at Reagan, and I looked at the people in the foreign policy were very far to the right, and then they moved to what I would call, you know, centrist right, right? So my prediction was that the bureaucracy is powerful and that it eventually wins. In other words, the bureaucracy, the career professional that studies bananas, when you get around to negotiating with Ecuador, the banana expert carries the day. Or if you're doing missile defense, the experts, over time, feeding information, the White House prevails. So that was the one I got wrong, because I think the mechanism, and it's someone else will have to study. I think there is someone that has a book out on the NSC director or some directors, but it's actually become less functional. I mean, I think each NSC director, instead of moving towards the consolidation with the government, has gotten further apart, and I think that's unfortunate. So, you know, I'm not sure. You know, I'm not going to get into the conspiratorial. I'm just saying to you, because of many people decided in the Republican Party they weren't going to go to the Trump administration, and in the first round, those that did were from the far right end of the spectrum, and normally what happens, it moves to center, and I think that didn't happen. So there's some real people that have great respect for the administration, particularly the director of CIA. I know that'll cause a lot of consternation here, but that's got to be one of the toughest jobs, and it's been done extremely well. But I think the running of it, I mean, the government runs itself in many departments. You got to realize the post office doesn't really need the cabinet to run, right? And neither does the CIA, but you want to be in line with policy. But you need a functioning, and it's more about the mechanics of how you make government work that I think I misjudged where we are, and I'm quite surprised that we haven't worked our way through in the 4 years with the A team. I'm not impressed. Let me just take that totally out. I'm not impressed with the mechanism.
I'll jump in for 1 second before we go to the next group of Karen, Ben Bradley, and Craig. But yeah, you're right. When you have an administration start off, you usually start off with an A team. You have the A team, you have the B team, and then you have dinner theater. And I think in this case, you know, there were a lot of people who would have been a strong pick for state or defense or some of the other, you know, important positions and some of the top level senior positions. But because they were never Trumpers in the eyes of a number of people at Trump Plaza, they were either bypassed, or you have the added effect where, you know, somebody might say, well, I don't want to have my name and my good reputation smeared across the 93 million people who are part of the president's Twitter handle. So as a result, you kind of almost you find yourself narrowed down to this.
We have a problem. There is a real problem about public service today, and who's willing to. I went and talked to high school. It's not my favorite thing. I was a high school teacher, but the age gap now has gotten too far. The hardest talk is to get in front of like 700 high school kids between 14 and give a speech. Good luck. I've tried it. I think I did okay, but it's a really tough sell. But afterwards, I asked them, what are they doing? And none of them were going, I mean, they take the best 20 kids and they bring them in, you talk to them. None of them were talking public service. And that was a disappointment to me. You know, not the military, not the State Department, not CIA. Even the legal profession was not held in high regard. I mean, it was okay, great, tech, I get you, right? Criminologist, because you see CSI or whatever. But the fact of public service, the idea that you would be a public servant, and you know, you don't even hear the word with pride. I'm a public servant. I'm serving my country, and it's not CIA. I mean, certainly there's a very deep-seated mission there, but every government employee is public service. I'm in here, but I really want to be clear, Bob. I wasn't talking so much about the cabinet, because the cabinet, almost all of them become I always love the FBI because they come in with independent people. Within a year, you would have thought they spent their whole life in the FBI. You got to give them credit. They're really quite good at that. But it's a compliment. CIA has a mixed record on that. Sometimes they do well, and sometimes, well, the directors that don't get along with the agency tend to have a bad luck. But I'm really talking about the mechanism of the White House. I mean, how do you run the White House? And you know, I don't know what you think of McMaster's, and I'm not. No offense to the military, I don't see military make things run. A credit, but the political part isn't so hot. So I wouldn't have been inclined to put military people in some of these jobs. But you look at McMaster's, there's a guy with a lot of terrific credentials. I mean, substantive, thoughtful. And so then you keep going down the line, and I'm just saying, usually You know, usually it gets to the Jim Baker. Well, it's hard to get the Baker, but you get to someone that has how to move Congress, the political, how do you work interagencies, how do you keep smoothness from, in the government. I mean, after a while, you need some really sophisticated political savvy. And I just don't think we got there.
Okay, so we're on to Karen, Ben, and Craig, and we're going to probably hope we can run into a few minutes into extra innings and beyond our 1:30 spot. So Karen, you're up.
Thank you. And Mr. Devine, thank you for that last comment.
You can do a bullet question. I'll give you really short answers.
Okay. But I do want to say, as an elected official, when people ask me why I don't like Trump, there's a number of reasons, but because he doesn't know how to govern. That is his problem. And people are voting for a personality, or did. And it makes those of us in local elected government, our jobs so much more difficult. And so thank you for recognizing that. My question goes back to something you said earlier on about the fact that the United States doesn't have a strategy for how to deal with all this cyber problems from our adversaries. And so my question is, given how much technology we have, is that because of the culture at either the CIA or the National Security Council, or lack of leadership by the president? I know you mentioned in a number of your comments that it didn't matter who was in office, but is Mr. Trump just refusing to understand that? I mean, we can get into the whole Russia thing, but your analysis of why that is.
But Karen, I was actually saying even one step beyond that I think it's a society. We politically, Republicans, Democrats, we haven't come up with how are we going to deal with this, whether it's
as a policy question.
Yeah, as a policy question. How far are we going with Facebook and Twitter? I mean, where are we going with all of this? I mean, I don't think we have a strategy. I mean, we're having hearings. We're trying to figure. There's not a simple answer. If I had the strategy, I certainly would write an op-ed tomorrow morning, right? But this requires people that really know this is a highly technical issue. So I think it's the manifestation of it comes into the intelligence community as well. But you have a cyber command now, so you have to centralize it. I mean, that much I think I know. You've got to centralize. There's risk in centralizing, but the question is really a political question as well. How are we going to use it? What are we going to do? What are we going to do with our cyber? Are we going to bring down Iran? Are we going to bring down? I mean, how are we going to use it? What are the limits to our use? What's our policy? If Russia does something, we're going to respond. I mean, how are we going to respond? So I think the problem with politicians, let me reframe this, say
That's
the more
okay, I'm used to it.
No, but I was going to put an age factor on this, and that is, and just let me use a company. Many of the CEOs of traditional companies have no idea how technology is working. But I mean, in other words, each generation, even within the company, you have to go down. It's an inverted pyramid. The smartest people on what's really going on down in the cyber area, down at the bottom, right? The people at the top, are still having, their, board meetings and so on. And even they don't even know how vulnerable they are. Now I put myself in that category. I try, right? And we have people that really know their stuff and help other people, but. So I think it's hard. I think, and then I'll pick on Schumer and the rest of Congress. But, do they understand? I mean, who understands? I mean, don't put me on the committee. I'll just say that right up front. Get it to me when you have it all worked out and you need me to tell you, okay, move right or left. But I mean, I just think it's such a profound, complex issue that as a nation, we don't know what are we going to do? How do you deal with bullying? I mean, how do you allow people's whole lives to be denigrated online? I mean, where's the restraint? So, and yet you got the free speech amendment. If you're in the journalism business, everything goes, right? So I guess I think it's in this realm. Now, Russia doesn't have this problem. Neither does China.
No, because they just have dictators that tell us this is what we're going to do. Yeah.
You have capability, and the president or the chairman says, yeah, apply that capability. We are, and God bless us for having it. Democracies have great strength historically over dictatorships. Dictatorships eventually collapse. Hopefully democracy, seldom. But the point that I'm making, where we are now at a disadvantage is, and I'm not proposing we change it. Democracy is, it's like kind of a stumbling block on how to deal with this new world. But when you have bipartisan, I want to come back to that. We had a bipartisan committee. This is, trust me, there's not truth on one side and lies and deceit in the other. We need, there's plenty of that on both sides. You need to get together. There wasn't a Cold War, but this is one of the things. I could go down, be brief in Congress, and the Democrats were as hawkish as the Republicans on what we were going to do in Afghanistan. We need to get back to some things, not everything. You can fight over certain social issues and so on, but national security issues. And on this one, I said, you really, and the leadership isn't the president. You probably need hundreds of people at the local level and other campaigning on this issue and mobilizing the American people. Where do we want to be? And that's leadership, but it's not because one guy gets elected president. You really need American consensus. We don't know what we want to do, as far as I can tell.
Thank you.
Okay, Ben, and then Craig, and then we may have to wrap it up, and we'll go from there. Ben, you're up.
Thanks, Mr. Devine, for your comments today. You said in your opening remarks that you thought that the Russian objective in the election here was to destabilize rather than explicitly favor Trump or Biden. Does that mean that you disagree with the unanimous consensus of the intelligence community in 2016 that the goal was to favor Trump over Hillary? And just another second part there, which do you think is more of a threat now, Russian interference or Trump's own undermining of the election by putting so many chips on election fraud, which most experts say is non-existent?
I agree. I think the assessment of on the election is valid, that the preponderance, not exclusive though, they're not saying exclusively. There were other efforts to undermine some of the minor parties, but the bulk of it and the emphasis of the finding is there. But the question isn't, did they support Trump? The question is, what was their objective? Okay. And what I'm saying to you is, I think their objective is to create, and I think I would fine tune destabilize, because destabilize has a finality about it. In other words, you destabilize and it collapse. It's really keeping the West off balance, keeping it disruptive, right? So maybe that's a better word. So if you want to have your objective is having turbulence, then maybe supporting Trump is the pathway there. And I think in the case of Putin, I think he was genuinely, this is with hindsight, genuinely angered by the Democrats and what he saw as a violation of the Moscow rules. In other words, we were meddling in his country. Now, the truth of the matter, the CIA was not meddling. I've seen nothing to support such a thing. But he thought that all the, pro-democracy elements in there were a plot. I go back, he is a Dresden man. He's not looking at it. We allow a lot of people to go out and do what they want around the world. So there was genuine dislike. But I think the objective, even when I look at it, how much money was really spent by the Russians? If you're talking about, you wanted to destabilize the United States, you put a lot more money, a lot more emphasis. This was, I don't want to use the word dabbling because it wasn't, but this was not the full, if the Russians were, this is to the death, we didn't see it, okay? But they were making their points. And I want to come back, the truth of this will really be known someday, and it'll come from a defector that will say, listen, I was in the cabinet meeting, and this is exactly why we did what we did. And I said I was stumped by the fact that they did it, but I'm not disputing the fact that they did, right? So, and then your question about is Trump destabilizing and so on. I mean, that's a question that, I'm not a domestic political person, but I do want to say one thing, which I think I'm going to say in my final wrap up of the pre-election period is, the election could be decisive and one way, decisive, and, we don't have a post-election problem. But it's looking more and more that, that we could have a sustained dispute about the outcome. But I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic that the institutions of this country and all of its key agencies and the military, CIA, defense, justice, and the Supreme Court, whether Amy's on or not, I think they will support the genuine winner of the election. So after all the back and forth, I think I'm giving the benefit, not the benefit that I know how the people in my old agency, and I know I've been living with the military and the state. There's a genuine, the people put their lives on the line for this country because they believe in it, and they are not going to falter if the returns of this election look like they're being taken by either side. So I think it will be, so if there's some optimism, while we may have a rocky November, I think the winner of the election will be the inaugurated on 20 January.
Right. Thank you.
And the last piece of the pie goes to one Craig Newmark. And then we'll wrap things up.
This is a very long story, but there's some optimism here. There are people, because I've seen them firsthand, in loose networks of people from the government, like NSA, DOJ, FBI, who are working with people in NGOs tracking disinformation and cybersecurity, working with people in industry who are trying really hard to do the right thing. They've done a pretty good job regarding disinformation from our foreign adversaries. The problem is that many of them lack the will to go after domestic sources of information. But there is a lot of progress. There's a lot of good people in government doing a great job. Their fear is that if they're noticed doing a great job, that could be a career limiting. So there's a lot of room for optimism. I'll stop there.
So I would say where we're likely to get our strategy first is in the government. I mean, in the foreign policy arena. When do you use it, and what are the? Because I think it's, as you point out, it's easier to get a consensus around how to. It's not going to infringe on the freedom of speech, right? So, in other words, how we deal with Russia, how we deal with Iran, or how we deal with any competitor or adversary will be less confrontational. How we clip whatever segment of society's wings you want to clip on this issue, whether it's the big companies or the individual that wants their full freedom, it's going to be much more controversial. That's why, and I don't know how I think we need a new generation, not to speak ill of any, Karen, I'm not focused on you, but we need a new wave of political people that are taking this issue on for the good of the country and not politicizing it. And not immediately in front of me. I have optimism about 2024. I'm leaving this election alone. But no matter what happens, I have a feeling the next 4 years in both parties is going to be about the future and what types of people are going to be leading this country. And I suspect it's going to be, and I can't tell whether it's a hope or an honest analysis, or whether it's a younger generation of leaders with more propensity to deal with modern issues in a way that isn't a knife fight on each and every issue. We need consensus on the whole set of issues, and I've never seen a country that's few of you of my age on this call, but I've never seen it so depressingly hostile environment. I mean, I used to go down on the hill and actually, you could have, I actually traveled. I was in London and Pelosi was there with half a dozen, she was on the Intelligence Committee, half a dozen Republicans, half a dozen Democrats. We had a great time, went out to, all the sites, went to the Parliament, and I thought, well, can I finish on one story on Newt Gingrich? Can you give me that, Bob?
Sure, go for it. Yes.
So I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to leave these congressmen out of my sight because it's the Intelligence Committee. I wanted to make sure I still had an office when they left. So, but we had a wonderful time. And again, whatever happened to that, I think we've all eyewitnessed it. So, but Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, so he was there, and I told my admin guy, get me a ticket, so I'm going down with them. So we went in, and they took the delegation, and a fellow came over, and he was dressed in a tuxedo, and he said, Mr. Devine, come with me. Well, I had Newt's ticket. So they put me down on the floor. Now you can't tell by this Zoom session, but I'm 6'5". I stand out like a sore thumb. So I get behind a pole and crawl down into my Toulouse-Lautrec disguise. And I come out and I hope Newt didn't see me. I said, well, Mr. Speaker, how did you enjoy the session? He said, it was pretty good, Jack, but God, I wish I was down there on the floor with you. I told him that years later. So I wish we could laugh as politicians among politicians again. Laughter go a long way. Okay,
well,
Bob.
I want to thank everybody for coming out today. It was a good group, a smart group as always. And Jack, thank you so much for your time. And when the new book comes out, we'll be here to support you and sell books. Jack, I'll get the book plates off to you tomorrow. I'm going to reach out to everybody on the book stuff for those who are buying books. Just a quick heads up, just a reminder that next Monday, same time, same station, we'll be with Ben Bradley Jr., Richard Wolf. Then we have John Callis. John was with us earlier in the call. And then we have Alicia Stryker for something completely different. And then we start the new year. And we're, even though this is our 25th year, I think because everything else has gone to hell in 2020, we're going to celebrate our 26th anniversary, masquerading as our 25th anniversary next year. So that'll be a lot of fun. So thank you for everybody for coming.
Thank you.
This was great. And we look forward to the next one.
Thanks, Bob.